war, right? Like the idea of being in the military and going to war is a deep and fundamental trust in the in your basically in your neighbors and the people who are voting to put you in those positions, because more or less the military themselves tend to be apolitical or supposed to be apolitical, and so it really is about the civilian participation. But if they're uninformed because they're afraid to ask even a not even a difficult, they're afraid to ask easy questions, right?
Mhm.
Then we have a major problem. And so I see that there is some value in these veterans who are making these book deals and creating these storytelling opportunities, if only as a substitute for the lack of sort of community conversation that we see all over the country. And maybe those book deals wouldn't be as interesting or as lucrative or as popular if we were having conversations in town halls and amongst neighbors and at church socials. But like somehow we as a society taught ourselves that we're not allowed to say much to anybody who's been to combat besides thank you for your service. And I do blame that on a certain number of veterans who actually perpetuate that idea. And they're just flat wrong, right? They actually were paid by the taxpayer, right? So they
Mhm.
have a right and an obligation more, to kind of explain a little bit of what they're doing. You don't have to tell your personal stories, but you have to be willing to engage in a conversation with somebody about some basic elements of your military service. That's going to help all of us.
Yeah, I mean, I want to point out that probably the books that end up getting these movie deals, they tend to have a narrative that make a lot of money in Hollywood, right? So these big blockbuster films that show our service members as heroes, they attract a lot of viewers. And so do the types of movies that kind of show troubled or PTSD stereotypes. So if those are the movies that are making money, those are the books that are getting movie deals.
Right.
I guess like what kind of framework can we use to move away from those stereotypes while still
Yeah.
incentivizing Hollywood to basically have any type of narrative about veterans?
Right. Still letting Hollywood make some money. We can't
Right,
just tell them,
right.
hey, you should make films that are boring and factually accurate. And they're like,
Exactly.
yeah, that's not going to do well at the box office. Yeah, you're totally right on that. I think that the first thing is what I spoke on earlier, which is that idea of a sort of common narrative, to normalize the depiction of veterans. So, well, my best example is always Ed O'Neill's character from Modern Family. It's a character named Jay Pritchett, and if you watch it so religiously, you know that he's a Navy veteran. If you watch it periodically, you might not, because it only comes up once or twice a season. But he's just a regular guy with all these characteristics who then, happens to be a Navy veteran. That's great. And I could give you dozens of examples of that. They don't all stand out. You don't even think that they're veteran or military shows. They just happen to be, they're shows about something else that happen to have a veteran in them. So that is a device by which we fight that. But even if you look at like the film Lone Survivor, which Peter Berg wrote, directed, and produced, and did a fantastic job with, there's a little bit of valorization there, but I think justifiably, right? Like these are people who, with the exception of one person, spoiler alert, Lone Survivor, uh, that everybody gave their life, right? And in some ways, one of the individuals got the Congressional Medal of Honor for it. So that is valor, right? That's true heroism. That's true valor. We do tell that story. We should tell that story. That is a modern day, odyssey, if you will, in some ways. But the important thing about Lone Survivor was, and I truly believe this, when it came out, and I was involved a little bit in some of the post production elements and some of the fundraising behind the film. I would tell people all the time, before Lone Survivor came out, name a battle from the longest war in the history of America. Right? Even back then, it was already the longest war in the history of America. And if you walked out on the street and said to 10 people, can you name one or two battles from the longest war in the history of America? They probably couldn't do it. I mean,
Mhm.
maybe they would say Tora Bora. They might have heard of that from the very, very, very beginning of Afghanistan. But they could name something from Vietnam, something from World War I, something from World War II, something from the Civil War, something from the Revolutionary War. I mean, they know Bunker Hill backwards and forwards, but they don't know anything from the current conflict, right? And the idea that now we can just say, whether they say Operation Red Wings, which is the more official name of the battle, or they just say that lone survivor thing, that is introducing civilians to the fact that we've been at war for now 17 years, at that time over a dozen years, and that is crucially important. So those films serve at least that purpose, as well as to tell the story of people who are genuine heroes, without saying that all veterans are heroes just because they put on the uniform. But the people in that film are heroes because of the things they actually did.
Mm-hmm. As China's role grows greater on the global stage, you want to stay up to date on the issues most pressing to China both domestically and internationally. Check out the Just China podcast for in-depth analysis on recent headlines and investigative reports on Chinese matters that affect our globalized world. We are Just China. Find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening.
Got Your Six has this process where it'll certify a movie for having accurate veteran portrayals. I know you mentioned Modern Family, but could you give us some more examples of what those Got Your Six certified portrayals are and look like?
Right. So I ran Got Your Six for the first 4 years that it was in existence, which was 2012 through 2016, actually late 2015, but 4 years there. And we started that certification when I was there, the sixth certified sort of an award or a stamp of approval for films. And that was, it was really just meant to be an incentive, but it just set a standard. It said out loud what we were looking for in these films and television shows. And sometimes it could be a show where, there's a prevalent veteran storyline all the way through it. Sometimes it was a guest star. I remember one of the shows we worked with was the Mindy Project, where Seth Rogen was a guest star on the show, and he was meant to be Mindy's love interest from years past. And needless to say, it was Seth Rogen, so he was hilarious. And they cracked these jokes, and they sort of poked fun at some of this valorization stuff. They kind of poked fun at the thank you for your service narrative, and they poked fun at those types of things, and that was great because humor can be so powerful. Some of the other instances involved us, going into writers' rooms sort of in preparation for this award and talking to folks. And I remember talking to a television show that had primarily women characters. And they said, well, we can't have a veteran because we have primarily women characters. I kind of laughed. I said, well, first, let's have a conversation about the demographics of the military. And yes, you can. But number two, it doesn't have to be your main character. Maybe if you want it to be a male veteran, it can be a love interest of your main character, and it can be someone that comes through in passing. And again, we were really celebrating both the films like Lone Survivor or American Sniper that told the true or near to true life story of something from the current conflict, as well as looking at humorous portrayals and looking at the Modern Family portrayal, or just that guest star that comes in and serves as a temporary love interest who happens to be a Marine. And that to us was really, really powerful. And the reason we created the program was to try to make it more prevalent, to try to incentivize people just to throw that in there. You're already creating a character from scratch, right? And you're going to decide if this character is male or female, where they're from in the country, how old they are, how tall they are, what race they are, what their interests are, et cetera, et cetera. You might as well occasionally say, well, he or she used to be in the Army, right? Mm-hmm. Without even going into any detail. That's easy, and it makes the character more dynamic. So we were trying to incentivize in that way.
So shifting gears just a little bit, I remember reading a report maybe last month or a few months ago about how the Army had turned to creating like a rap music video to try to increase recruiting because they were having issues with recruiting.
1775, known as a takeover. Uniform paid for, electric bill paid for, water bill paid for, living quarters paid for. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, earn more. Don't be a hostage to college.
Do you think Hollywood or entertainment can appropriately be used to generate support for recruiting?
It's an interesting question. I think there's a direct and an indirect answer. And I think that if you think about it as a direct relationship between the Department of Defense and, whether it's Hollywood or the NFL, or the professional sports, which has been an issue in the past, then there are and should be some limitations on the way that taxpayer money is spent on those things. That said, I do believe that the military should have marketing budgets, and the military should actively try to recruit, et cetera, et cetera. The Marine Corps has famously had amazing recruiting videos, and you'll talk to Marines of my generation, and they'll say that a video in the late 80s of some Marines slaying a dragon with a sword is the reason they're in the Marine Corps. It's like, okay, well, it's not the best reason to join the Marine Corps, but if it worked, and now you're a great Marine. So that's just part of it. That's just marketing. But if we're talking about, so again, I don't think that necessarily the DoD should be spending a ton of money to do what Guy 6 was trying to do, for example, to inject veteran narratives into film and television. That could get expensive quickly, which is why we did it from a nonprofit capacity. That said, I do think that all of us, all Americans, including filmmakers and writers and producers, have a responsibility to think about our role in this. And I think that that's kind of what we've been missing. That is the civilian military divide. People really not understanding that they have any role whatsoever. And so if, someone like Pete Berg, who makes a film about lone survivor, feels like that was his contribution to making sure that we have a strong military going forward, because he told a story that was of heroic people who weren't necessarily slaying dragons with swords, but were doing the modern day equivalent or the real life equivalent, then I think that, that might be, his contribution as a citizen. And so I think that there's a place for it, but really in an indirect manner versus sort of direct DoD taxpayer money going towards something like that, with, again, an exception for some limited level of marketing budget that is important.
So not like Battleship with Rihanna or the new Top Gun movie with Tom Cruise working on the Teddy Roosevelt.
I don't know what you're talking about. Battleship is why I joined the Navy.
See, so if it works, it works, right? So
I'm just kidding. That's not true.
I feel like, yes, sometimes we may cross lines, and you can get into individual. There's ethics people who deal with all of this kind of stuff and how taxpayer money is spent, and we have some rules on this. And so if it's done within the rules, that's fine. If we don't like the rules, then it's our job as citizens to work with Congress to change those rules. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'll leave that one. But I will say that we do want to keep seeing these films being made, and at some point, entertainment's entertainment. I tell you what, the same thing about that Marine Corps commercial with the guy slaying the dragon. You hear the same thing from Navy pilots with reference to the Tom Cruise Top Gun version, and that's why they did it. And so that's big and that's important. Also, look, we want films to be realistic, right? And as a filmmaker, you don't get to go purchase a Black Hawk helicopter, right? So when those guys are making Black Hawk Down, they're like, well, we kind of want to use Black Hawks because it's sort of the center of the story and it's in the middle of the it's the title. And so they have to work with DoD to do that. And we're actually really lucky as then the people who consume this entertainment, that we do have a DoD who is willing, with many exceptions and caveats, to work with films to give them that type of equipment, right? And I know I've talked to filmmakers who have had to do this, and they'll tell stories about sending their script through the Pentagon, because there's a guy in a department at the Pentagon that reads scripts before they authorize the use of military equipment such as a Black Hawk. And they'll say, they got sent back to me 17 times. I had to rewrite that scene 17 times because they don't give you notes. That would be against the rules. They just kind of say, nope, sorry, rejected. And so these filmmakers are working hard because they want authentic films for us. And the DoD is, putting up, a decent threshold for them to meet before they allow those taxpayer resources to be used for something like that. And so there is a symbiotic relationship that actually works really well for everybody, I think.
So, Chris, many of our classmates here at Harris will go into careers that aren't directly related to national security. What would you like them to know about the military?
I mean, the first thing is something I think I've mentioned a couple of times already, which is that, you're a part of it. Whether you are or not, if you're an American citizen and a voter, if you're an American citizen, you should be a voter. And so then as a voter, you're part of this entire national security, foreign policy, national defense structure. And there's probably plenty of things you don't like about it. Speak up about that. There's probably plenty of things you do like about it. Show your support for that. But mostly, just as a regular citizen, as a someone who lives in the United States, find that chance to have that conversation.